came to the summit 3 or 4 years ago. And I asked him whether Pakistan was complicit or whether it was incompetent. And his answer was, and he happily, readily said this, Pakistan and the ISI were neglectful. And when I said, does neglect mean incompetence? He said, no, neglect means they fell asleep. And then he added, but the ISI has a right to fall asleep occasionally.
Ah, well, that's an interesting answer.
A lot, President Obama, has been written and said about your relationship, your friendship with Narendra Modi. At his invitation, you came as chief guest. You were the first American president to come as chief guest on Republic Day. You did a joint radio broadcast together. And frequently, Prime Minister Modi used to refer to you as my friend Barack. What's your opinion of Narendra Modi?
I like him. And I think that he is... I think... I think that he has a vision for the country that he is implementing and is in many ways modernizing certain elements of the bureaucracy that I think are very important. But I really also was great friends with Dr. Singh, and when you look at the work and the steps that Dr. Singh took to open up and modernize the economy and launch what I think was really the foundations for the modern Indian economy, that's also important. So I think, look, here's the bottom line. Because India is a democracy, it has politics, and that's a healthy thing. As a non-Indian and as U.S. President, my job was to work with whichever party was in power. And so to avoid you getting me into trouble again, what I want to be very clear about is that what I found with both leaders who were Prime Minister during my time, the unifying theme was that strong U.S.-India relations were important, that India's movement towards a more modern economy that would give opportunity and lift millions and tens and hundreds of millions of people out of poverty was important, that electrifying the countryside was important, that rebuilding infrastructure was important. And each leader obviously had a certain view of how that was going to be accomplished. My job was not to evaluate the details of their various platforms. My job was to see whether their general focus and trajectory was consistent with what I thought was sound governance. And I found both of them to be engaged, honest, direct with me, and both of them took tough decisions in order to help underwrite the international system. Keep in mind, Dr. Singh was the primary interlocutor with me when we were saving the country from a global financial meltdown. Prime Minister Modi was the primary partner in unlocking the Paris Accords. Neither of those things were easy, and both required some political courage back here in India. And so you will not get me to play those games when it comes to my good friends in India.
Now, these days, President Obama, politicians have taken to tweeting their thoughts on any subject, on any day, almost at any time. Do you think tweeting your message is a sensible way of dealing directly with the people, or is it dangerous because when you have to compress, you end up simplifying, sometimes distorting?
Yeah, well, this goes to the point I was making about technology. And it's fascinating. I have an excellent focus group in my daughters, right? Because they are the generation that is on their phones and whenever there's some new thing or app, they have to explain it to me, and they're doing it very quickly, and I slow down, wait, how do I attach this to that? And and then they start swiping, and so I'm able to watch and keep up with how it's being used and how it's being absorbed. And what I would say is that Twitter, Facebook, WhatsApp, all these various platforms are extraordinarily powerful tools. And those tools can be used for good and they can be used for ill. I do think it is useful to understand, and we're just beginning to understand, what some of the inherent or built-in challenges exist within these new technologies. And you identified one of them, which is that it leads to a lot of snap judgments. And psychologists know that it turns out that most of what are called, quick snap judgments about complex issues are typically wrong. And so one of the dangers is that instead of deep analysis, or at least some skepticism towards initial information, and then the desire to learn more, evaluate, that we start seeing a generation or a citizenry generally that just looks at surface and the sizzle and not the steak, so to speak. I think I mentioned another tendency that we see is the degree to which these new technologies can create these information silos. In the United States right now, and this is not unique to Twitter, but it's part of a trend, those who watch Fox News and those who read the New York Times occupy completely different realities. I mean, if I watched Fox News, I wouldn't vote for me because there's this unrecognizable character. I remember when I was president, every once in a while I'd watch, who is that guy? This character named Barack Obama, and he's just portrayed in these weird ways, and there are these selective clips that come out, where the sentence isn't finished, and then, it's all edited and shaped to promote a certain story. And obviously those who subscribe to that view would argue that the New York Times is doing the same thing in its own way. But the point, though, is that you get these multiple realities, and it's very hard then for democracy to work in those situations. I can sit down with someone and have an argument about climate change. And in fact, when we were working on the Paris Accords, and there were some folks within the Indian government who would say to me, look, we're a poor country. Our priority has to be getting power and electricity to poor people, and so we should not have to do X, Y, Z. And I said, well, I understand that. So we can have a debate and a dialogue around this. It's hard to have a conversation if somebody says, well, climate change is a hoax. So I can't, I don't know what to do with that. I can even have a conversation with somebody who says, yes, climate change is happening, but there's nothing we can do about it, and we should just adapt. We should just go up into the hills, or we should just build houses on stilts, or whatever arguments they might make about adaptation. But if you're saying it's a hoax, then there's no way for us to bridge our differences in a constructive way. So I say all that to suggest that those of us who are leaders in any field, and look, I've got 100 million Twitter followers. I mean, I actually have more than other people who use it more often. But I think it is important to be mindful about both the power of these tools, but also its limits, and to understand that it can be used for good or for ill.
On this very subject, Speaking in Toronto on Tuesday, your wife Michelle said, and I'm
Uh-oh,
quoting
what did she
her,
say?
she said, never tweet the first thing that comes to mind. Never tweet from bed. Always edit and spell check. Who do you think she had in mind?
Well, it wasn't me because I do spell check, and I also use punctuation in my texts, which my daughters think is odd. They were explaining to us, oh no, if you put like a period at the end of a sentence, it sounds harsh. I said, no, that's English. You're supposed to, that's how you know the thought is finished, it's completed. So I think she was just giving general advice, the same advice that you used to hear from your mother generally, right? Don't say the first thing that pops into your head. Just have a little bit of a edit function. That's wise for life, generally. And you see in people getting into all kinds of trouble because they just send out some tweet and then they're trying to erase it afterwards. But somebody's screenshot it and then they're embarrassed. Hey, you know, your mother and your father knew better. Listen to them. Don't do things like that. Think before you speak. Think before you tweet. Same principle.
I won't say amen to that. I'll say kafefe instead.
Ah.
President Obama, my last question, because we're horribly out of time. America is famous for two Donalds, Donald Duck and Donald Trump. Which one represents the real America?
Well, let me say this. The thing I love about America, and I suspect the thing you love about India, is it is just this cacophony of life, and it throws up all kinds of variety. And there are political trends in America that I don't agree with and abide by, but I recognize as part of a running thread in American life.